The word Armageddon is used generically today to refer to any type of catastrophic conflict, especially if it's seen as likely to result in widespread destruction or the annihilation of human life. In the Bible, Armageddon refers to a climactic future battle between God and the forces of evil. The word ultimately is derived from a Hebrew word, which means Mount Megiddo, the predicted location of the battle. Revelation 16:12 through 16 is the record of what will happen toward the end of the tribulation, when an angel pours out the sixth bowl judgment on the earth. The word Armageddon makes its only appearance in the Bible in this passage. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw three impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Then they gather the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. In Revelation 19:11 through 18, a final battle occurs at Christ's second coming as the conquering Christ defeats the forces of the Antichrist. We take this to be a description of the Battle of Armageddon. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. On his robe and on his thigh he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. The exact location of Armageddon is unclear, because there is no mountain called Megiddo. However, since part of the original Hebrew word can also mean hill, the most likely location is the hill country surrounding the plain of Megiddo, some 60 miles north of Jerusalem. Throughout history, armies have fought countless battles in that region. Egyptians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, as well as the armies of Napoleon. Megiddo was the site of battles during World War I and the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. In the future, the plain of Megiddo and the nearby plain of Esdraelon will also be the focal point for the Battle of Armageddon. The plain of Megiddo, or Armageddon, was famous for two great victories in Israel's history. The first, Barak's victory over the Canaanites, and the second, Gideon's victory over the Midianites. Armageddon was also the site of two great tragedies, the death of Saul and his sons, and the death of King Josiah. According to the futurist interpretation of Revelation, which is our view, the Battle of Armageddon will be a real battle in the future near the end of the tribulation. Demonic influences will cause the kings of the earth to gather their armies for an all-out assault on Jerusalem. The Antichrist will be leading the charge. Jesus Christ will return to earth with the armies of heaven. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. He will defeat the forces of evil. He will cast the Antichrist and the false prophet into the lake of fire. He will bind Satan, and he will set up his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years. At Armageddon, the Lord Jesus Christ treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty, and all things will be made right.
Well, first of all, the book of Revelation is all about a great conflict or struggle between the church and the forces of Satan, the forces of evil. A Revelation is what is called an apocalyptical book. In other words, it is a book of prophecy written in the form of signs and symbols. The ancient Jews were very familiar with apocalyptic writing. It was nothing new to them. There were several apocalyptic messages in circulation back then, some inspired and others uninspired. The book of Daniel in the Old Testament is one example. The visions recorded in Daniel are, of course, full of symbolism and figurative language. The book of Daniel, which was written while he was exiled in Babylon during the captivity, was about the political and spiritual events that were to come over the next several centuries, culminating with the establishment of the kingdom of Christ on the day of Pentecost and the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish temple, all taking place in the first century, several hundred years after Daniel wrote those things, but from our perspective, 2,000 years ago. It ultimately pointed forward to the emergence of Christ's reign from heaven after his death, resurrection, and ascension, which all came into reality with the establishment of the church in the first century. But the truth that Daniel was conveying was robed in symbols and figures and not in literal, forthright language. Now, the book of Revelation is written in the same way. Why? Well, an apocalypse served two purposes. Number one, to convey a message of hope to God's people in a time of darkness. That message being vividly illustrated with symbols and figures that the reader alone would be familiar with, the Jews particularly would be familiar with. And number two, the purpose was to keep that same message out of the wrong hands. Namely, in the case of the book of Revelation, the pagan Roman Empire, which was at that time oppressing and persecuting the church. The book of Revelation was most likely written in about AD 96, near the end of the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, who unleashed an awful and bloody campaign of torture and death upon Christians who refused to denounce Christ and worship him, the Caesar, as Lord and God. The persecution of the Roman Empire would have seemed to those frightened Christians to threaten the very annihilation of the church, and that would have tempted them to surrender their faith. So Revelation was written to them in a kind of code language that they, the believers, could understand because they were familiar with apocalyptical type language. And it was written to them so that they would know that though the battle was raging and the times were very threatening and frightening, that ultimately they would be victorious over their enemies through Christ. It is a signal of victory given to them from heaven. And so again, in highly symbolic language, a series of events are unfolded in the book of Revelation and repeated using various symbolic figures and patterns to convey and reinforce the message of hope and triumph to those very early believers. In Revelation chapter 16, there is the picture given of 7 bowls of God's wrath being poured out into the earth. Now, these bowls of wrath were pictured in the form of plagues, like plagues of blood and sores, fire, and frogs are mentioned. And all of these symbols were merely telling the Christians that God's judgment was going to be poured out against their enemies that were now assaulting and persecuting and threatening them. But ultimately, they would meet God's judgment. And those enemies are pictured throughout Revelation as the dragon, the beast, and their associates. Now, the 6th bowl that is poured out in this symbolic vision is described in verses 13 through 16. Let's read those verses again. He says, "And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon." Well, it should be obvious to us that figurative language is being used throughout this passage. I mean, surely we're not to think that literal, croaking, ribbiting, slimy frogs are going to come out of the mouths of literal beasts and dragons to do battle in Armageddon. Well, of course not. It's a symbol referring to the forces of cunning deception that were doing battle against the people of God at that time. John is simply seeing that these evil and nefarious forces would face God's judgment. And it is likewise a picture using symbols saying that all of this would culminate in the battle of Armageddon.
The world is arming itself for the final battle. $2 trillion are spent each year on weapons that kill. Humans have possessed so much power to destroy lives at no other time in history. Many agree that we are preparing for the last battle that will transform the reality we know. And according to Jewish prophecy, Israel will be at the center of this enormous conflict, many known as Armageddon. Today, many people fear the future due to the unstable situation around the world. All you need to do today is turn on the news to understand that things are getting hectic around the world. And so, in today's episode, I would like to present a biblical perspective on the final conflict known as Armageddon. During this year's Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, the United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution voting 129 to 11 votes that disavowed Jewish ties to the Temple Mount and called it solely by its Muslim name of Al-Haram el-Sharif. 129 countries agreed that Jewish people have no connection to the Temple Mount, and this site belongs exclusively to Muslims. Now, I am not sure if that was done on purpose, but remember what Hanukkah is all about. It is a memory of the historical reclaiming of the temple by the Jewish people from the oppressing pagan rulers. Therefore, this UN resolution is a clear insult to all Jewish people. But to tell you the truth, this is nothing new. If not for the strong opposition from the United States, Israel would long ago be a target of aggression from almost every country in the world. Israel does not have many friends, and it seems that the big brother, which the United States have always been, is getting distracted and involved in other regions of the world. The US total and reckless evacuation from Afghanistan is a clear sign that their priorities have changed. Today, the Pacific is the key for the United States and not the Middle East as it once was. Israel is a tiny nation and does not have much land at all. If we look at the world map, you can hardly spot that country. Just look at this map. Israel is surrounded by huge countries with much larger populations and land than the Jewish nation. Also, remember that all the countries surrounding Israel are Muslim and have a common religion. Israel is the only country in Near East where Islam is not the majority religion. Since the creation of the Jewish state, Israel has been attacked many times by its neighbors. We have seen several military miracles that prevented the destruction of the resurrected to life nation. Of course, don't get me wrong, Israel is not a perfect nation, but everything needs a perspective. Why does the majority of humanity so hate this tiny nation? Is it that horrible? I would argue that no other country receives so much negative attention as Israel. No other people have been hated so universally and experienced multiple extermination attempts. All we need to do is look at history. Pharaoh in ancient Egypt, Haman in Persia, Antiochus IV Epiphanes of Greece, Tiberius of Rome, Inquisitions and Crusaders in the Christendom, pogroms of the Russian Empire, Hitler in Nazi Germany, Stalin in the Soviet Union, Al-Khamenei of Iran, United Nations and UNESCO are all examples of the ongoing hostility towards the Jewish people. And let me share with you something personal. Only in Israel and perhaps America do I feel safe to say that I am Jewish and not fear that someone will mistreat me.
Every serious scholar of the Bible is watching the nations as they rise against each other. And they are particularly watching Jerusalem because the Bible says that Jerusalem would become a burdensome stone to all nations. And it certainly has. Thousands of years ago, the Bible prophesied that the Jews would be scattered among the nations, that God would draw them back, and they'll eventually obtain Jerusalem. That happened in 1967, when the Jews set foot in Jerusalem for the first time in 2,000 years.
But it wasn't until the 1967 war with neighbouring Arab countries that Israel captured East Jerusalem, including the Old City. Jerusalem. This ancient city lies at the very heart of the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
It's arguably the most sensitive real estate on earth. The Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif as it's known to Muslims, is the epicenter of the long, bitter struggle between Israelis and Palestinians.
You have to think that for Israel, Jerusalem is about 1,000 times more important than Washington, D.C. is to the United States.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
Middle East today, a Palestinian day of rage over President Trump's move to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Palestinians claim Jerusalem is their capital too.
Tonight, the violence President Trump was warned about. Protesters burning images of him after his announcement recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
At least 6 people were killed today in clashes between Palestinians and Israelis.
3 Israelis were stabbed to death tonight.
There were heightened tensions in Israel this weekend, just days before the opening of the new U.S. embassy in Jerusalem.
Violence overnight in Jerusalem.
Police in Israel are blaming Palestinians for 4 violent attacks. 2 happened in Jerusalem.
By Muslim anger over increasing Jewish visits to a popular mosque in Jerusalem.
While no respected biblical scholars have named the nations, they do agree that certain nations will come together against Israel in one climactic end-time battle called Armageddon. What does the word Armageddon mean to you?
Like the end of the world, I guess. That's pretty much the stereotypical definition that I would consider it, yeah.
When you say the world, you mean the end of the age?
Yeah, correct. The end of the age.
If we let this be another Sodom and Gomorrah, but maybe we might be the generation that sees Armageddon.
Most groups stop here and they stop there to see how big is the valley of Armageddon. As you know, the belief is that the last war on earth will take place here.
China and Russia, 2 of the world's growing superpowers, are getting closer than ever.
The South China Morning Post looks at the growing links between Russia and China.
The Chinese military official also met with the Russian general. So you have a potential alliance forming not only with China, but also with Iran.
Both Russia and China have reason to deepen their ties.
China bestowed an honorary doctorate on Russia's president last month.
China is, by any measure, our strategic partner.
Both Russia and China are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, where they often block resolutions from Western countries, especially relating to Syria and Venezuela. Another key part of the Russian-Chinese relationship is increasing military coordination. Russian TV news recently showed joint military exercises.
America's commitment to the security of Israel is ironclad, and I might add, so is mine.
Like all Americans, I have been inspired by Israel's long struggle to survive and to flourish. America, as always, is proud to stand with you.
And you have built a mighty democracy that will endure forever and can always count on the United States of America to be at your side.
America stands with Israel today, tomorrow, and always.
That the most important partner that Israel has always been
and will always be the United States of America.